This sounds super cheesy. I feel like this whole video is pretty cheesy, but it's kind of the talk I need to hear sometimes. Hello, my name is Sydney, and today I want to talk about something that I face on a fairly regular basis, and I'm sure a lot of you do out there too. I wanted to talk about doubt. Now, yes, I'm a writer, and I experience a lot of doubt as a writer. Don't we all? Oh my goodness. But I think just as a human being, that's something that we all come across. Now, I call myself Sid the Dreamer because dream is my favorite word. It certainly has changed meaning for me over the years. It used to kind of mean like ambitions and obviously the dreams you have at night when you're asleep. And I loved Christopher Nolan's movie Inception, which was about dreams within dreams, so that was awesome. But lately it's felt a bit passive. You can dream about something, but that really does you nothing if you're not going to go after it, if you're not going to do something and be active about it. I should be called Sid the Doer, and maybe that'll inspire me to live more up to my name, because right now I've been doing a lot of dreaming and maybe not so much doing. It's one of those things where I could lay out, you know, all the things that I've accomplished in the last 24 hours, in the last week, in the last year, or, you know, for my entire life up to date. I could give you a list of all the things that I've ever done, and yet for some reason it could look really impressive on paper, but when I think about it, when I go from my day-to-day life, it doesn't feel like maybe I've done that much. But sometimes I keep facing these roadblocks, and these roadblocks are admittedly self-imposed. You know, part of me is like, is that the realism in me coming out? Like, I can dream about things, but maybe they're things that are sort of ridiculous, or that people would deem ridiculous, or things that would be difficult to achieve. But it also just kind of feels like it's me making excuses for myself. Now, there's a quote from one of my favorite artists, Aurora, in her new song Daydreamers: "When feelings are heavy, they become all we are." And I like that quote because it talks about how, especially if you are an emotional person like myself, you can get so bogged down in emotions, by emotions, that they become really overwhelming and you start to maybe act accordingly. So like in these moments of doubt, when I'm feeling like the things that I want to do are unrealistic or impossible or just plain stupid, I can kind of spiral on those. You know, it's a slippery slope, and I find myself slipping and slipping deeper and deeper into doubt, to the point where it can be really hard to come out of it. And sometimes it just takes time. You know, I can go to sleep, the next day I wake up and it's like, oh, what was I thinking? Of course I can do that. But sometimes it takes a bit of work. You know, you have to talk yourself off of a ledge, kind of. Creatives tend to be very emotional people, and there's this thing that I talked about in a previous video about creative depression, which, like, for me, depression can be different for, you know, anyone who experiences it. But for me, it tends to come in relatively brief bursts, like maybe it could last anywhere from just a couple of hours to, you know, a couple of days. It usually doesn't go on for too long, although sometimes it can like reoccur. It usually stems from a lack of productivity in creativity. So like, as a creative person, if I'm not fulfilling my creative endeavors, if I'm not writing, or if I'm not, like, you know, scratching that creative bone, does that make sense? Then I start to feel unproductive, and it starts to feel really down, because I use my writing as a way to work through my emotions. Whether I'm writing nonfiction or fiction, I need my writing to work through those emotions. And so if I'm not able to do that, then it really starts to feel like the rest of my life is falling apart, even if it's not. It feels like having moments where you doubt your writing, your ability, yourself as a person. It feels almost like it comes with the territory of being a creative. It's weird. It's like, why would I put myself through that? You know, but then when you see how it feels to be on top of the world when you're writing and the story is flowing, or things just seem to be going right whether you're writing or not, it totally balances out those lows. In fact, I think it exceeds the lows. You know, it turns those lows into highs of their own. Life is a roller coaster of emotions, of course, and even when you're at the top of the hill, you know that there's going to be a low point at some point in the future. But the important thing, I think, to know is that you'll come out of it. The phrase goes, what goes up must come down, but also what goes down must come up. Life is all about balance. Things have to give and take. I want to throw another quote at you guys. "I am all in a sea of wonders. I doubt, I fear, I think strange things, which I dare not confess to my own soul." And that's Bram Stoker. It's from Dracula. But I think it's a fitting quote, because sometimes, I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I'll think things and I try not to think them, especially if it's something I'm afraid that will happen, particularly if it's something that I'm afraid will happen. Do you ever feel like when you acknowledge certain things, they're bound to come true? You know, it's like from your lips to God's ears, or it's like jinxing something. Once something has been acknowledged, it must be true. It must be coming into the universe somehow. For so many years, I lived in constant terror of myself. Doubt had married my fear and moved into my mind, where it built castles and ruled kingdoms and reigned over me, bowing my will to its whispers until I was little more than an acquiescing peon, too terrified to disobey, too terrified to disagree. I had been shackled a prisoner in my own mind, but finally, I have learned to break free. So that's Tahir Mafi in Ignite Me. I like that. I like that quote because it's positive, isn't it? It speaks to coming out the other side. It's like what I said before. What goes up must come down. What goes down must come up. You find that balance. Eventually, you start to learn that, okay, there's going to be another hill, but I'll get through it. You just have to know. And I know in the moment, it often feels like, okay, I'm not going to get through this. I'm going to waddle here forever. Nothing's going to change, but time heals all wounds. I'm just throwing so many quotes out there today, y'all, because, I mean, all these quotes exist for a reason. All these people have been through this as well. I can tell you about one specific doubt that I had. As a writer who is writing a YA fantasy book, a work of speculative fiction, I often think that my story is not good. Like, it's not something that can be taken seriously. It's not something that people will, hail as an excellent example of literature. Because it's not literary fiction, people will turn their noses up in my story simply because of the genre. Simply because it's targeted toward a young adult audience, even though obviously anybody can read a young adult book. And it's one of those things, like, sometimes when you find one negative thought, another negative thought is close behind, and soon you're like buried in them. But in the moments when I'm feeling particularly good about my story, when I'm really excited to write, when I have that good, like, anxiety feeling, like I'm really anxious and I'm so excited about what I'm working on, when I have those feelings, then I tend to reflect on how I had been feeling, maybe days before, when in my moments of doubt. And in those moments, what I was thinking seems pretty ridiculous, but I also don't want to discredit how I was feeling. Like, you feel how you feel, and your doubt can become a good quality if you train it. It must become knowing. It must become criticism. Ask it, whenever it wants to spoil something for you, why something is ugly. Demand proof from it. Test it, and you will find it perhaps bewildered and embarrassed. Perhaps also protesting. But don't give in. Insist on arguments and act in this way, attentive and persistent, every single time. And a day will come when, instead of being the destroyer, it will become one of your best workers, perhaps the most intelligent of all the ones that are building your life. And that is Rainer Maria Rilke, Letters to a Young Poet. That quote is interesting because it doesn't really talk so much about coming through the other side of that doubt, and knowing that your doubt is really just playing on your negative feelings. It talks about harnessing that doubt to your advantage, turning it into a critic, turning it into a way to help yourself improve and grow in whatever endeavor you're facing. It can make you stronger if you let it. Instead of telling you something is bad or something is wrong, it can tell you how to improve. It can thicken your skin. It can help you kind of turn your cheek to it. Not all criticism is valid, and not all criticism is needed at a particular time. Sometimes you need the criticism. Sometimes you just need, positive feedback, positive reinforcements that you're doing okay, because you are. You really are. And even with traveling, you hear about all these crazy horror stories. Like right now, there's all those stories about these people dying in strange ways in the Dominican Republic, terrorist attacks, and all these crazy, horrible things. And it scares me. Like, I want to travel the world. Like, you kind of have to face your fears in some ways. Like, you got to be smart about it, but you have to learn how to. It's about turning that fear into a sort of skepticism, a sort of reminder to keep your wits about you and to be smart and to think things through, knowing how to be safe, knowing what you can do if you end up in a situation, like preparing yourself. In that case, it's fear, but you're turning it into something that's positive. You're using it to your advantage, just like that last quote is. It's not always a quick thing, I may need a few days for me to come around and to take my doubt and to harness it into something. And that doubt's always going to be there, but I know what I want to achieve. And I know that there's certain things that I just can't let get in my way. So I may have obstacles like fears of flying or fears of, safety when I'm traveling. But the important thing for me is to keep pushing forward. There's a quote, I don't know if it's a quote or if it's just the thing that people say. A lot of people, hundreds or thousands or millions of people want to write a book, for example. But writing a book is not easy. Writing a book is a marathon. And the ones who do reach the end are the ones who persevered, the ones who didn't give up. Doubt can knock down so many people, and so many people don't give back up. Don't be that person, especially if it's something that you really truly want, because you don't want to regret not going after it. The only way to get to the end is to keep doing it, is to overcome those doubts, find ways around those doubts, find ways to turn that doubt into a criticism that can benefit you. Climb out of those valleys to reach the tops of mountains. You might be sweaty, you might be tired, you might be ready to collapse on the floor and die. But you'll have made it to the end. And then you can look back and be proud of yourself. I know this is all so much easier said than done, but it's a practice. It's an art form, you know? It's not just the writing that's the art form, it's the finding ways to overcome your doubt, but it's a natural part of life. I believe in you. I hope you believe in you too.